Good. Welcome to the Green and Healthy Schools Classroom Learning Series. I'm Leslie, and we're excited to have you join us today for the presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Skyward, with this very short video.
Since our humble beginnings as a small family business, Skyward has evolved into a global technology leader serving more than 2,000 school districts. At Skyward, we are proud to support the initiatives of the Green and Healthy Schools Classroom Learning Series.
Again, thank you to Skyward for sponsoring the series. So let's get started. Presenting today is Steve Schmidt. Steve is a forestry outreach specialist with LEAF, Wisconsin's K-12 forestry education program, and much of his work supports the school forest program. And he's enjoying a deep dive into the intersection of how healthy forests help make healthy waters, of which this presentation is a part. His favorite activities are spending time with his family, especially on Washington Island in Door County, bird hunting with his retriever, Griffin, and exploring the waters of Lake Michigan from a kayak or with an underwater remotely operated vehicle, or ROV. Thanks for presenting today, Steve. We're looking forward to hearing more about your experiences with wetland ecosystem services and stormwater flow.
Well, thanks for the introduction and welcome. Hello, everyone. LEAF is part of the Wisconsin Center for Environmental Education in the College of Natural Resources at UW-Stevens Point. I'd like to recognize that the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point occupies the lands of the Ho-Chunk and Menominee people. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral land that you are on. Think about what that means to you. We're all on the sacred lands of First Nations. This is important to me because I feel a responsibility to the earth that takes care of us. I did my graduate research on the Menominee Reservation and honor the way the Menominee people care for the earth. So take a minute to look at this map and figure out which First Nations land you are on. So this is the second in the Understanding Community Systems series that LEAF is putting on. All of these will be recorded or have been recorded. The next one after this is on climate change and trees, and after that, exploring winter ecology. Also of note, on October 21st, check out your home's seasonal wardrobe, Preparing for Winter from KEEP, which is Wisconsin's K-12 energy education program, also part of the WCEE. I like to take walks with my family around our fairly hilly neighborhood. I naturally have an interest in trees, and my work here with LEAF, combined with my training in water science, has given me lots to think about in terms of drainage patterns around the neighborhood. For a few weeks this summer, a neighbor worked on taking out a 100-year-old sugar maple that was causing some issues. The neighbor was sad to see the tree go since he tapped it for sap every year and it shaded his driveway and house. Here's the root system from that tree. It had to be dug out by hand, and so it offered me the opportunity to photograph it. We'll come back to this toward the end of the webinar. Feel free to put some answers in the chat box or simply ponder this question. What does rain do after it lands on a surface near where you live? I'm looking for the three basic things that can happen with rainwater after it settles on the earth.
Okay, this demonstration I think is an excellent one that can be used with elementary students all the way through high school students. So if you want to try something like this at home, there are instructions on the PDF for how to build this model kit and how to order the right supplies and everything. With younger students, it makes sense to do the experiment first and then discuss what everything represents, just get them going right into the experiment. But I think all of you can probably handle a little bit of the details at the same time. So what we're going to do essentially is pour some water in these trays and see how long it takes them to get down here. So this represents, this is about 100 milliliters of water. It represents precipitation. And the plaster in the tray represents a road or a hard surface. And that tray drains down into this, which is supposed to be a lake or river. So some type of surface water body. And then the sand is supposed to represent some type of soil. And we'll start with the sand. So as you're watching this, make sure you think about some things you might want to share in terms of what you've observed. So we're going to use a timer. This works better in teams of students, but I've done it a few times, so hopefully it works. Ready, set, go. And stop. So for the first drop of water to get from one end of the tray to the other, it took about 13 seconds. So we'll do the same experiment with the road. Ready, set, go. Stop. So the road took about 6.5 seconds. So think about why the difference occurred that you see there. Take a look at the setup one more time so you can kind of ponder that. And I'll switch back to the other screens and we can talk about the results.
So anytime a model is used, I always tell my students to think about exactly what everything represents and what its limitations are. So hopefully you could see that there were definitely some limitations there. You know, we used sand. There could be other types of soil that could be tested. You know, you could have a plant in the soil. So whatever you can think of. Some other possible extensions might be to measure the volume or put back in the cup so you can just do a visual comparison to see which of those trays gave the most water to the surface water. So anyway, what that demonstration really visualizes or makes come alive is the fact that when water goes through the soil, it has more volume that can sit there and be taken up and go into the ground as groundwater to recharge streams at a slower rate. Obviously, on the road, the water runs off quickly and gets to the stream or the lake, and that can cause other problems. So to put that demonstration in context a little bit, I've got a list of some water words to go over with you. I'm sure you all know precipitation is a word that is the various forms in which water falls from the sky in the form of snow or rain or other precipitation. The model demonstrated 2 of the 3 things that I asked you for initially that rainwater does when it lands on a surface. It can run off, or it can infiltrate, which means to soak in. The third thing it can do is evaporate or turn to a gas, sometimes go directly from ice to a gas. So it can freeze or pond in place, but eventually it becomes mobile again. So basically the 3 things are become a gas, run off, or infiltrate the ground. Impervious surfaces are impermeable to water, such as paved surfaces and rooftops, while permeable surfaces would be most other surfaces that allow water to percolate into them, such as soil, which was the sand in this demonstration. Agricultural lands or forests, neighborhood yards, parks with trees, those would all be pervious or permeable surfaces. As water flows across the land or down through the soil, it can pick up contaminants such as animal waste, road salt, oil from cars, leaky septic systems. The fact that runoff can carry pollution away from an area into bodies of water far away is one reason we must prevent and minimize those pollutants in our environment. And the last water word is watersheds. These are an area of land that drain into a specific body of water. So for instance, we could talk about the Plover River watershed, or the Wisconsin River watershed, or the Lake Michigan watershed, the Mississippi watershed. You get the idea. So it's the area of land that drains into that specific body. To put some of these words in context beyond the experiment, I'm going to give you a little tour of my neighborhood watershed. If you'd like to explore your own watershed, Earth Partnership has a wonderful set of activities called Follow the Drop, which are linked in the PDF of this presentation. So explore your neighborhood or school ground or larger landscape and look at what the stormwater flow does by creating something similar to what I'm about to show you, excuse me. And you can go even further with calculations of the area of impervious surfaces versus pervious surfaces. Understanding stormwater flow and how we manage it is really an important aspect of citizenship. For teachers in the webinar, I highly recommend Earth Partnership's Indigenous Arts and Sciences workshops. Check them out on the web. Now let's go out and explore my neighborhood. So what you'll see here is on the left, I have a screenshot of a Google Map image of my neighborhood. And what I'll do is use some drawing to show you a little bit about it to help you orient. So water generally flows in this direction from Hilltop Avenue, go figure. And the video is being shot from right here to begin with, and we're looking up here at Hilltop. So this is during a stormfall event. And one thing I'd like to point out before I press play on the video is this berm here that was made after this road was built quite a while. The neighbor on this side here was having all kinds of water issues in his basement because water was coming off of the road into his yard. So this berm was an engineered problem solver, or solution, I should say. Okay, so let's hit play. So we're looking from up here, and hear the water maybe gathering at this storm drain. And you can see it's not very clear water. Water then goes under the road to the other storm drain. I'll pause the video. So right now we're looking up here. So water drains down in this direction into the same storm drain. And then water is collected, goes to this French drain in between these two houses. And underground, and comes out here into the woodlot behind my house. So this whole wooded area here is basically a forested wetland. And interestingly enough, water collects here, ponds here, ponds here. This neighbor owns this part of this wetland. This whole section here is for sale, believe it or not. And I couldn't imagine if somebody built a house here, all kinds of water issues that they'd have. But there's a for sale sign there. Maybe we'll learn someday. So the next place the video will jump to is back here. And I want you to notice how little water is coming through. Now, to be fair, you know, if we waited a few hours, maybe more water would be coming over the curb here from the wetland. But for the most part, in a typical stormfall event, it absorbs most of the water that comes through it. So if you think about this whole area here is draining into that wetland. So now we're going down the street to another storm drain. Again, water flowing in this direction. And then we're going to jump up here, and water flows down the hill to that same set of storm drains. Speed that up a little bit. And then we look down the street where the water continues to go through a series of storm drains to the end of the road. And what you'll see next is the end of the road. And what we've got here is a series of detention ponds where the water that comes from that whole area I just showed you, and also this part of the map, if we ever get a big enough stormfall event, these will fill up in series. And I've never seen much water in these at all. So I think they do their job pretty well of slowing the flow of water to the river, which is a few hundred yards this way. It's the Little Rib River. This is some kind of a groundwater or stormwater monitoring device. I haven't really researched that too much, but I plan on it. Be interesting to find out a little bit more about it. So back to my driveway here. So this is towards my garage, and this is downhill towards the road over here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. And you'll notice on the right of the crack in the driveway is wet, and on the left, it's dry. And oftentimes this happens I see this in the spring with freeze-thaw cycles, and that's what cracks up this impervious surface and makes it a pervious surface. So I'm debating whether or not to fix it. What would be the best for the environment is to let it crack up and replace it with gravel to make it pervious. On the other hand, if we ever decide to sell, that might not be appealing to potential buyers. We're faced with small environmental dilemmas like this every day. Many of these types of dilemmas involve choices between money and environment. While it's cheaper for me in the short term to let it go it might cost me more later. But wouldn't it be best for everyone in the environment to build less impervious surfaces? If that water soaks into the ground, it recharges groundwater and is less likely to contribute to downstream flooding. So let's get to really the focus of this talk. What difference can one tree make? To answer that, the USDA Forest Service developed iTree, which is an awesome tool that allows you to estimate the benefits of individual trees. I'll show you one example with iTree from the MyTree platform, and then you should each try it out after the webinar. It's pretty fun to play with. Maybe test it out on a tree in your schoolyard or in your own yard. iTree Hydro was designed to help urban planners quantify impacts of impervious surfaces and trees and their effects on water flow, but it's free and can be used by anyone interested in stormwater solutions. And then the last link on this slide, the Project Learning Tree iTree curriculum is free and linked on the PDF that Leslie will share with you all. Let's check out a tree in my backyard. So here's the landing page for the MyTree platform. And when we get started, we see something in a search bar. You just type in the address you're looking for. All right, and maybe this looks familiar to you. Now you can see how far away that river is, the Rib River at the end of the street. So if we zoom in a little bit, so I have a tree actually already documented in here, but we'll add another one. So when we go to describe the tree, you can see there's question marks along the side here. So if you ever are curious about how to fill in one of these, you can just click on the help. If you are going to record maybe all the trees in your schoolyard, you can name the project and create an account. There's also, I should have mentioned this, the community tree map, which is a platform that the DNR put together, and Leaf helped out with that a little bit, I believe. Maybe Kate could chime in the chat if she's listening. But anyway, you could check that out as well. I don't have a link in this, but maybe we can add it to the chat. Kate, if you're here, you could maybe do that. Select a type. So this is an existing tree. So you can either search by common name or scientific name, but I'm just going to start typing in. I have a big white pine in the backyard. So Eastern white pine pops up. Then I select a condition of the tree. I would say it's a good condition tree. It's lost a few branches from the tree that we had to cut down next to it. Trunk size. So you have a choice of either diameter, which is a little bit hard to estimate by looking at a tree, or you could go out and use a sewing tape measure and measure the circumference. But I know this one is about 24 inches in diameter, so it's a pretty big tree. And if you're wondering how to measure that, it does tell you here, gives you some details. But again, in the next of this series of webinars that Leaf is putting on, the Community Systems series, you can find out how to do some of these measurements yourself. The tree is fully exposed to sun, and it's within 60 feet of the building. So then there are some more pop-up menus. Select the building vintage. Mine was built after 1980, and that matters just because older houses tend to be maybe a little draftier and have higher energy costs. So that enters into the equation. How far is it from the building? This is for shadows, 20 to 39 feet. Estimate the compass direction. This one I am going to go to the help with just to demonstrate for you. My tree does happen to be southeast of the house, but what they want is the direction from the tree to the house, which in this case is northwest. So even though the tree is to the southeast, we're going to list as northwest because the house is northwest of the tree. And then we push the green button at the bottom and it cranks out some numbers. You can either go back and edit or remove the tree if you'd like, but let's see what we get. What I love about this is it looks like a food label. So it tells you how good this is for your body or for our planet, so to speak. The total benefits for this year for this tree were about $45. And if you think about a tree living potentially 100 years or more, you can just imagine how much those ecosystem services are worth. And it's always hard to quantify those, but this is doing at least a pretty good job of giving you some relative figures here. And we're most interested in stormwater runoff avoided. So you can see that's $2.03. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but the runoff avoided was about 230 gallons, and the rainfall intercepted was about 1,400 gallons. So, you know, you add those together, and that's a lot less water that is getting very quickly to the river downstream. Other things are air pollution, energy usage per year. You know, that would be like energy savings due to climate control in your house, the shade the tree provides, etc. So really a pretty cool platform. The other amazing environmental analysis tool is US EPA's EnviroAtlas. So I'll share that with you as well. I could spend all day, if not weeks, exploring places that are interesting to me using this GIS map tool and its dozens of layers. So we'll go back to the web here. And so all of the layers that you can add are on the left, and you can open up one, and there's even more choices within one of those choices. I'm going to go down and put some hydrologic features in. First, I'm going to zoom in to Wisconsin. We'll go back to somewhere in central Wisconsin. And if I click on hydrologic features and hydrologic unit code, boundaries and labels, that actually will populate in just a minute or less all of the watershed areas. So now you have the defined watersheds. The orange ones are the smaller creeks and streams, and it goes all the way up to these bigger yellow borders. So this border, which just goes to the east of Stevens Point, everything that falls to the west of that is the Mississippi River watershed. Everything that falls to the east of that is in the Great Lakes watershed. So the Wolf River, and then the Fox River in this case, and Green Bay. So if you're wondering what those mean, if you click on the star, it pops up a legend. We're going to actually take that layer off and add a layer called reduction in annual runoff due to tree cover. So if I click on that, well, nothing happens here in central Wisconsin, but in the more metro areas, we start to get some data popping up. So you can see Green Bay, and we'll go down to Milwaukee. So wherever there's specific data for this, that data will pop up in mostly metropolitan areas. So these are the urban foresters who are helping figure this out. So things that are or areas that are more purple are the percent reduction in annual runoff due to tree cover is much greater. So it makes sense that that reduction of runoff would be a lot less in downtown Milwaukee, where there are more impervious surfaces. Okay, so another interesting tool that EnviroAtlas can provide. So we're going to go back to Wausau, where I am currently. And I'm going to show you one of my favorite things to play with in the EnviroAtlas. So we're going to zoom in. Maybe you start to recognize that shape. Oops. All right, so I'm going to click on this button up here, which is the raindrop tool. And I'm going to activate the tool. And what's cool is you just drop a raindrop, and it will show you where that raindrop would go. But notice something interesting. When I showed you the video, the water flowed this way because of engineered surfaces. So the raindrop tool shows you where water would flow without any engineered surfaces. So that provides a really interesting comparison to see that water that normally would fall in my backyard would go all the way down to here. There is a creek down here, but it doesn't show up as blue. And that flows into the Little River further downstream. So all of the stormwater for this whole area here is being put into the Rib River over here instead of a little further downstream. So again, I could play with this for hours and hours, but I'll spare you and let you play with it sometime on your own. So how do trees prevent flooding? Take a minute to think about some of the specific ways that trees prevent flooding that you know about, and feel free to type into the chat.
Steve, there is a comment in the chat from Kate. She just wanted to check and see with the Enviro Atlas, just because there's not kind of, there's not those colored blocks showing up in the rural areas. Does that mean that that data is just not being collected in those areas?
I'm not sure, actually. I think it just means that there isn't enough data populated in their system. So I would imagine places like Stevens Point and Wausau, some of the smaller towns in Wisconsin probably have some similar data. But I know in Green Bay, for instance, that the University of Wisconsin Green Bay has a watershed program that I know they're collecting quite a bit of data. So that probably helps to populate it. I'm not exactly sure. That would be an interesting thing to find out, though. So essentially, trees slow the downhill movement of downhill movement of water to surface and groundwater to streams, which helps to protect areas further downstream. They do this with their canopy, which reduces the impact of raindrops. And the canopy also decreases erosion and allows the water to soak into the soil. As we saw in the demonstration, soil can store some of the water. And of course, the roots help hold the soil in place and capture some water for transpiration. And if we go back to this picture of this root ball again, I wonder how much surface area there is on just the roots you see here, not to mention all the microscopic rootlets left in the ground or dried out on these surfaces. Soil and tree roots work in tandem to prevent flooding. The roots keep the soil in place, and the soil can store some water for the tree to use well after a rainfall event. And the last bullet is an indirect but very real benefit. Carbon storage by forests limit greenhouse effect warming, which can mean fewer large storm events that produce flooding. The next LEAF webinar in our Understanding Community Systems series will tackle this benefit of trees. So go plant some trees. We'll close with this diagram I found on a stormwater blog post at deeproot.com. And it's just a nice diagram to give you this cross-sectional view. Of course, when water lands on pervious surfaces, then the water soaks into the ground and can be stored in the soil. But the tree roots can filter pollutants out of the soil. They can detain water or block it. And they can also retain some of that water and uptake the water for its photosynthetic processes. And then a lot of that water can be evapotranspirated out and to form clouds, which then can move the water elsewhere. So for an example, one tree with 1,000 cubic feet of uncompacted soil with 20% soil water storage can hold a 1-inch stormfall event from 223 meters squared of an impervious surface. So I know that sounded like a lot there, but think of this as about 2 football fields, or a parking lot that's about 2 football fields, including the end zone. And a 1-inch storm event in a 24-hour period would produce 2.54 centimeters, 1 inch. How could we figure out how much total water there is in that stormfall event on that impervious surface? Well, we're looking for a volume, and so volume is 3-dimensional. So if we do the math on that, we would multiply the area of that impervious surface times the depth of the rain. Notice we had to convert that to meters because centimeters times meters squared doesn't really do much for us. We can't do that mathematically. So to get meters cubed, we do that math and we get 5.6 meters cubed. That's water not added to flooding downstream from potentially 1 tree. And that equates to about almost 1,500 gallons of water that's stored in the soil or moved out by the tree into its leaves. So pretty impressive. So closing thoughts here. I wanted to share with you the Trunks and Kits program that the WCEE has. Some of our kits are still available. Others that aren't so easy to sanitize, we have those out of the loan program. But I'd like you to check out that if you are interested at all in other kits and forestry programs, we are putting an impervious surfaces kit together with instructions. And part of that kit is actually available online. There's a video link to how to make that kit, that demo kit that I showed you earlier, and also instructions for where to purchase the supplies for that. So the PDF that Leslie should be sending you has these links in them. So if you have any questions beyond right now, feel free to email me at this email address. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Steve, that was fantastic. Thank you. I've not seen those tools that you shared before, and those are pretty neat. I bet I would spend a lot of time using those just on trees in my neighborhood. So Steve, it looks like there's a question in the chat. How would you recommend students start exploring around their own homes, schoolyards, or parks?
Well, as far as stormwater runoff, I would recommend walks around the neighborhood, and you know, if it's not raining or too dangerous with lightning and things like that, put on a raincoat and go outside and just watch what the water's doing. Just get that basic idea, and some of those observations that you make will provide further questions, and then you can explore using some of these tools I've shown you. Videotape what's happening with the water, so you can, I say videotape, you can tell my age a little bit. So record, you know, record with a device what's happening and document that. I mentioned the little woodlot behind my house, and a few years ago they marked it like they were going to come in and build a driveway or something, and that led me to call the DNR water person or wetlands person, and it come to find out that they had mismarked the wrong block. They were looking for a different block to mark to build a new house. So thank goodness they weren't trying to build in that wetland back there, because I think we all have pretty dry basements, even though I'm downhill a little bit. My sump pump has never kicked in. So anyway, you can see some of the things that I've thought about in my neighborhood, just from some of the observations I've made walking around. Granted, I have some training in water science, and but you know, you've got to start somewhere. So I would really recommend just getting out and observing. Get outside. You really, you know, we're all in front of the computer way too much, and even when it's raining, it's worth going out and walking the dog or playing outside if it's not dangerous. So that would be my recommendation. I know we're going to probably close pretty soon. I'm just going to pull those two samples of water that I poured in the demo and compare them on screen. Give me a second. So these are the 2 cups. Oh, that's right. I have a background, so you're not going to be able to see them. I'm doing magic tricks. It's actually, the result was actually surprising, and I can't figure out, this is something I'll have to think about a little further. So this is the one, I have to move it so you can maybe barely see it. Anyway, the one that was the soil and the sand, actually there's more water that made it down through to the bottom, and I'm going to have to investigate that, because that doesn't make sense to me. So email me if you want to know the answer to that. I'll try to figure it out. I would have expected the one with the sand to hold more water in it, and the one with the road to let more water through. So we'll see where that water is coming from. But that happens in science. We get unexpected results. And Kate asks the question, I wonder if the plaster holds some of the water. That's a thought that occurred to me. And if I were going to figure that out in a scientific way, I would measure the mass of the plaster, and I would try to dry it out in an oven. And then I would measure the mass for 2 or 3 days after that until I get a steady mass. And then I'll be able to calculate how much water was held in that plaster. Now, even plaster that feels dry to the touch has water held in it, because the water molecules, that's part of what makes plaster, and that's true of cement as well, that there's water in it, even when it appears to be solid and impervious. So yeah, maybe it just soaked it up like a sponge. Interesting to think about. It's a mystery.
All right, Steve, well, I don't see any other questions, so I think we'll go ahead and close it here today. I want to thank you so much for presenting. It was great to have you as part of the series, and thank you to all the participants. We hope that you learned something today that you can take and share with your students or your families or whoever you might share with. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.